active recovery is the way to go for sure, because we recover through our muscles contracting, through getting blood flow to the area. All those things are beneficial. So sitting on the couch is never the answer. And some of that becomes based on how long people have been training for and how self-aware they are. You kind of get to know where that is, but you do have to be cautious on both ends of people that aren't as sure. They lean too much on I just need to sit on the couch today and really just recover from a hard training day. But some people think they're going lighter than they are, but there's some things to be aware of on your own in terms of like how's your breathing, how's heart rate, how's different things, in terms of there are some things to look out for. If you're huffing and puffing, even if you think you're going light, it's probably more intense than you think it is. And that's where self-discipline comes in, of knowing where that line is for, is this an active recovery day or am I getting into another training day? Because one can be extremely beneficial and one can set you up for problems for the next training days or training week.
Welcome back to the Yogi Triathlete Podcast. This is the place where we further our mission to create a better world by bringing meaningful conversations to the endurance sports world. And today we've got an amazing guest whose purpose is to assist all of us to live a thriving, strong, and confident life in the body we were given to live in, which I love those words. I took some of those words right from your website. I'm here with my co-host, Coach BJ, and Dave Paczkowski of Inside Out Strength and Performance, a local Carlsbad company founded on the idea of that being injured, limited, and in pain is no way to live the life you were called to live. And my God, I just love that. Dave has all the labels and certifications, including a doctorate of physical therapy. He's treated several of my ultra running pals and has made a guest appearance at our weekly run group to give us all activation exercises to help us run efficiently and after run protocols to keep our joints healthy. Dave, welcome to the show.
Jess, BJ, really appreciate being on here. Excited for this talk.
And he's got me ergonomically set up. I'm standing on a 45-pound plate right now to get me lined up with the mic. We're in your awesome studio, which Dave's got such a sweet setup. So you're not even that far from the beach, right off the highway, so super easy access for people. And we're literally on the base floor of your townhome, which is above us. I was telling you before we put the mics on, Dave, that these exercises that you brought to our run group that day, we're still doing every week. We're doing the warm-ups and the cool-downs. My first question is really like, how important is it to take those few minutes before you're doing an exercise like running? Let's just say running, for example, because pretty much everybody that listens to this is running or walking as a part of their exercise regime.
Yeah, extremely important. It's all the runners I work with, if I ever ask what their warm-up is, it's the first mile to 2 miles typically is the answer I tend to get from it. There's not much of a structured warm-up involved, but even just, it doesn't have to be, I think people get overwhelmed thinking that it has to be this long warm-up routine that they have to go through, but typically 2 to 5 minutes is plenty enough to get some of the right muscles kicking in, just kind of dial in your movement and especially for runners with how much running's done on single leg, which is 100% of it. It's important to do some single leg activities leading up to it to just prime some of the right muscles before running.
I never thought of that. Yeah, running is you're always on single leg. That actually leads to the question that you were talking about earlier, BJ, about what you see in yoga.
So teaching yoga, you're in front of the classroom, and the way that we teach, we don't practice. We're teaching. So we are watching the class, watching the students. And we bring them to the balance phase of the class, the eagles, the tree, one leg up, the warrior threes, and majority of people find that extremely challenging. They're teetering out, and I always encourage them, like, that's great. Like, the fact that you can be in this pose and you see that you're wobbly shows that you have areas to improve upon. So why is it that most people, I may be setting you up here, but why is it that most people find it so challenging to stand on one leg?
It's a huge problem, and with the runners, there's some very talented runners I work with that have trouble standing on one leg for longer than 10 seconds without wobbling. And when we say standing on one leg, there's a standard of just standing on a leg and being able to wobble a little bit and balance, but to be stable on one leg is different than just being able to simply meet the criteria, yes or no. It's how well. Shouldn't see any drop in the hips as you're going. Shouldn't see any wobble in the ankle or rolling in and out of the knees. So there's a difference between just being able to do it and being able to do it with stability. And to answer your question, there's strength requirements for that. Our balance systems are pretty complex. There's our visual system, which we overly rely on. There's our called vestibular system, or within our inner ear. That's think going on a roller coaster and getting off and feeling dizzy. And then there's all the receptors in our joints, and there's how well our hips are stabilizing. So standing on a single leg seems like such a simple activity, but there's a lot of moving parts with it that if neglected and not trained like anything else, going to see some limitations. And those limitations then show up when people are running. How many reps over the course of, especially with some of these ultra runners I work with, thousands and thousands and thousands of repetitions, even slightly incorrect movement, knee rolling in, ankle collapsing causes some of the common things we see, plantar fasciitis and hip problems, knee problems. All those things are pretty closely linked.
So how can people, I think you bring up a really good point. When we are working on our balance, you see a lot of knees wobbling, a lot of ankles, the foot's really working. So what's a way because that's not necessarily a great way to build your balance, right?
You're saying just standing on one leg?
Like when people are standing on one leg and you're getting all this wobbly. So is that good, or should they be like finger against the wall or hanging on to something? How would you recommend if somebody is, because we see a lot of the wobbling, which, I mean, I guess it's like the muscles are activating and the body is trying to find that balance, but are we harming or helping?
It's a loaded question. I wish there was a more straightforward answer, but from my standpoint, I want to know why are they having trouble balancing? Of all those things that are going on, is it because some people simply have, quote, bad balance, but a lot of times it's more of a strength issue. If your ankle doesn't have full mobility, that causes limitations of how well your joints are talking to your brain pretty much, so that can affect your balance. So if it's a mobility issue, is it a hip strength issue, a core strength issue? Any of those things can cause some of that wobble. So just to say holding on won't necessarily do it unless it's maybe a true balance issue. I want to get to the root cause of what that is. Is that are their hips not strong enough to support them in that single leg stance? Are their ankles super locked up that doesn't cause for the right signals up and down? And otherwise, we're just kind of shooting guesswork at it instead of addressing the root cause of why it's happening.
I remember when you came to Run Group, our answer to everything was it glutes and core? Glutes and core? You're like, yeah, I mean, in the short answer, yeah, core is good. But now I'm realizing that there's so many different layers, and we're talking about brain-body connection. And how tied in is that brain-body connection with body awareness?
It's huge. In talking single leg balance, there's, like we were just talking about, there's a very direct connection, but in anything, how confident we are, what we're telling ourselves, how we're telling ourselves about our movement, and we bring pain into it, not to go deep down a rabbit hole, but bring pain into it, and that messes a lot of things up with brain-body connection. And people that are in pain, there's a physical component to pain, but there's a huge mental component to that. There's huge psychological components to it, and the stories we're telling ourselves of, yes, I think this is going to hurt, there's a better chance that that's going to hurt. And that's where we see, especially in the chronic cases. So in an acute case, I twist my ankle, there's going to be some swelling, there's going to be a bunch of chemicals that get sent there to help with healing and cause physical pain. But if that ankle sprain becomes a recurring issue over the course of years and years, and you think anytime you roll over a curb it's going to hurt, there's a better chance that it's going to hurt. And that's moving away from the physical side of it and more into that mind-body connection. There's a lot deeper rooted thing of what we're telling ourselves, and the body tends to follow suit pretty well with some of that stuff.
So if we're what we repeat over and over becomes ingrained. Mm-hmm. So if I was talking to some runners at this race at the 50K and asked them if they ran just because they were spectating, they're like, no, I can't run, I have shin splints. It's so finite, right? That's their stance. I have shin splints, cannot run. So whether they have shin splints and to what degree they have it probably doesn't, it's what they believe. right? If they believe that this is going to limit them from running, well, first thing, let's back up. Do they want to run? I guess that's the first question.
Yep.
And then second, is this belief so strong and so true that it's going to keep them from doing what they love? So that's that mental component you're talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. And shin splints, another one of those things. There's a lot of factors that go into shin splints. It can, again, want to look at ankle and knees, and we look local, but also, I mean, hips and core. And Justin, glutes and core play a role in that too.
Glutes and core.
A good starting point at least. But yeah, absolutely. So on both ends, if someone doesn't want to run, or there's some fears or limitations around. Whether that's a fear of failure, whether it's a fear of succeeding and doing better, there's all these things that can replay some of those stories that are being told then, and whether that's on the extreme of not wanting to run, or of so much of their life is wrapped up in running that if they can't, both ends of that are going to produce a potential negative result, and not just the ones that don't want to run, but also the ones that, hey, this is my life, this is what I do for stress relief, this is what I do for fun, and if I can't do that, you think going to be a little more anxious when a little injury sets that might not normally be serious, but because you have so much tied up in it, it's going to cause a heightened response of pain than someone that, if they're like, oh, well, if I have to take a few weeks off of running, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, this is 100% the rabbit hole we want to go down.
It's attachment, right?
Yeah, well, it's identity. Right? So you've seen this. And really what we're talking about, and we talked about this with the sports psychologist we launched today, and BJ works with it as he physically and mentally trains our athletes, and I work with it as a mental coach, and you work with it as in the physical therapy and the mobility and the performance piece, is that we're really talking about behavior change and busting up patterns. And creating new neural pathways in the brain, and for movement, and for creating these brain-body connections that are very healthy. So when you see that walk in, because I know you've had this experience, like that person who's like, and BJ has lived this, right? Like his identity was triathlon, and that got taken away. So when this happens, like with somebody that you're working with, how do you start to kind of get to that root? Like where do you even begin? Because it's you can give them the exercises all they want, but that there's something bigger there that's really preventing them from living that confident, thriving life.
Yeah, when they're coming in, and that it happens more frequently than you think, whether that identity is running, whether it's playing with their kids, whether it's just being their job. A lot of people tied into that as well. So it's super common, and for me, have to know where that line is too, of when to refer out to, if there's more deeply rooted things that isn't within my scope, but within people coming to see me. The biggest thing is trying to restore some of that confidence, and especially if it's something that have seen success with in similar patients before. There's a roadmap that we can follow, and from a mobility standpoint, from a strength standpoint, reassuring them that this is not life-ending, career-ending, because a lot of people come in with that. Well, I read on WebMD that I'm never going to be able to run again, so they come in with this story they're telling themselves. But being able to cut down some of those, break down those barriers after we identify what those barriers are, and that comes from asking follow-up questions, knowing what their knowledge is, what their starting point is, what they're telling themselves. You ask follow-up questions and keep asking whys and why, and eventually they'll people are in tune with their body, and whether they know it or not, you can usually get to some of the deeper things by just listening, by asking follow-up questions and letting them tell you. It might start out, people come in with a knee injury, but you say, okay, well, why do you need, why is this so important? Well, I like to run. Why do you like to run? It feels good. And then you keep asking these whys, and it's like, it finds out it's like, this is my stress relief. When I don't run, I'm not a good husband. I'm not a good wife. I'm not a good father or mother for my parent. You get to these deeper things, and there's much more into it than simply, can I run X amount of miles? Yes or no. There's these deeper layers and once you identify those, once they can verbalize those, then we can start to address them, and it's going to look a little different person to person.
And it's really common, like you said, and common to the point where it's like within your scope a lot of times. Mm-hmm. Do you utilize those things like it's my stress relief, it's I'm a better wife or I'm a better husband or a better mom or whatever it may be? Do you use those almost as their points, their driving points to do the work? That those very things that the activity gives them is basically almost like the fruit, the reward.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the exercises that give them have to be tied into that. No one wants to do a glute bridge just to do a glute bridge. Like, you have to tie that into why it's going to help them get back to running, and then link that to their deeper why of why it's going to help with whatever that more driving force is for them. So absolutely you have to tie that into it, or compliance won't happen. And it's a lot, I'd say it's even more challenging in those. It's easier to get someone motivated who isn't normally the motivated type. It's a lot harder to throttle those people back that don't know how to throttle back. And when you mentioned slowing down, Jess, that's a huge piece of it. Is okay, everyone's good about hitting hard. Okay, I can do more. What more can I add in? What more can I add in? What more can I add in? But when you have to tell someone, hey, we got to throttle it back a little bit for these couple weeks, it's really important that we manage volume, get this under control. Trust me, you will be able to get back to it, but that's a much harder conversation to have with people.
I think, and that's the exact point of why detaching from your watch every now and then from the numbers is important. I think that driving factor to constantly, like, if you tell them to keep going, like, you've got to hit your 50, 60 miles a week, they'll keep doing that despite the pain or suffering that they're feeling. It's so true, though, when you ask them to step back maybe 10 or 15 miles, it's not a tangible, like, they can't see the benefits of it immediately. They can't see that Strava number that says, you know, I've hit my PR for the training for the whole year. So as you continually work with these people to step back, how do you help them embrace that? Is there any tools or any connections you can make for people? I see it a lot is a reason I'm asking. And it's tough with this external stimulus to pull away from, I'm not getting in my mileage, I'm not getting in my volume that I've always done, when that volume and mileage could have been the reason why you're here to help fix this opportunity.
Yeah, and the biggest thing I think with that is, and where I have to meet people with where they're at, is knowing what is their big goal, not just because a lot of people have several goals of they're chasing, say, X amount of miles per year, per week, or per month, but it's like, is that your big goal? Is that what they want to accomplish? Is it just how many miles you can run this month? If you hit that many miles, are you happy and you could retire from running? And for most people, that's a no. There's something else in there, and you keep kind of like keep asking whys. You keep digging into what is it, miles for a year? Is it a certain race? And once you find what that most important thing is for them, then that's the focus of, hey, we have this calendar on our day, this is the race you want to do, this has to happen if you want to be ready to run that. And it comes down to honestly telling them that this is what it's going to take. If you want to hit this amount of miles this month, go for it, but you're setting yourself up for potential to miss your bigger goal, which is, say, a certain race or something like that.
Those light bulb moments with your patients, how does that make you feel? Let's tie it back to you. So when you're asking these questions why, and finally they come out with it, and you see that aha, like, oh, I get it. In order to be doing this for the rest of my life, I need to stop and do this exercise now. Does that bring you joy? Like, how does that feel as a business owner?
Absolutely. It brings joy, and for the reason that I know those are the people that do really, really, really well with rehab, the ones that can accept that and come to that. And then you see the wheels turn a little bit. They start to ask some follow-up questions to get some clarity with it, where initially and naturally people come in, they don't know exactly how I can help them a lot of times, and they're a little closed off. And once you get that, where they start to see, okay, yeah, this starts to make sense, and they're asking questions and taking control of their health, those are the people that crush it in here. And that's what's exciting to see, is because they do good. It's fun to work with them when they're doing well and listening, and because that creates better results, and that creates just a much more fun atmosphere in here.
And that's somebody who is like, they just want to crush everything that comes their way. So we see the athletes that get really caught up with like, I'm going to run every day for the year of 2019 and then, and I'm going to do this many a month. And we get caught up in these numbers that are in the future and not realizing that that's not just the only goal that we can crush and get that same feeling. Like that if you're rehabbing for something, if you're prehabbing for something, like crush that. If you're picking your kids up from school, crush that. If you're making dinner, crush that. Like if you're taking 5 minutes to activate your glutes and core, crush that. And that when we have this drive to, because those people that are like running every day for 2019 and this many miles a month, like that's awesome. There's an amazing drive there and discipline to get there, but it's being selectively applied. And so you can apply that drive to making sure that this body that you're living in is ship shape for the goals that you have. How important, can you speak to like the stress, rest, and adapt process in the body?
Yeah, it's a huge piece of anyone that's regularly active. The stress is where we, to put it simply, the stress is where we temporarily break the body down, but the rest is what allows us to build back up. And we call our max recoverable volume, and that's a certain line we have that we can occasionally go above that line, but average throughout the course of a week, month, year, we have to stay. There's a certain level that we can get to before things start to break down that we tend to see. Now, there's also a couple things we can do to change that line a little bit, and that's where some of the prehab stuff comes in. That's where building a base level of strength and movement and some of those things, we can creep that line up a couple notches that allow us to push that a little further. But physiologically, there is a point for everyone that we can't consistently work above that line without recovering. If that average stays above where that recovery line is, something's going to eventually break. And that might be a tendonitis. That might be a lot of times that's an overuse injury. It's not just a one-time, my leg breaks. It's usually in the form of an overuse injury. It's in the form of getting sick. It's in the form of feeling tired and run down and exhausted, that you're not showing up in other areas of your life. So there's a lot of factors and signs to be aware of that when you're consistently pushing above that line, we have to either throttle back and usually simultaneously try and push that line up as well.
And what about, like when we think about rest, I think it scares people because they think, my God, I can't just sit around and do nothing. But what do you think about active recovery? After like I had a long run yesterday, 4 hours in the heat, doing some good climbing and things like that. And today was recovery in the pool. And then I might go out for a recovery run later, mostly because I need to be running at night with our buddy Lisa in Tahoe. And I'm like, I need to start running at night so I can like get my body used to that. But it would just be a super easy recovery run, which when I first heard recovery run, I was like, what? That doesn't even make sense. That's for psychos. But now I get it, training that low end just to get the legs moving. And sometimes that means I walk for the first 5 or 10 minutes and then go into a really nice slow pace. So what do you think about active recovery versus like the sitting on the couch?
Yeah, active recovery is the way to go for sure, because we recover through our muscles contracting, through getting blood flow to the area. All those things are beneficial. So sitting on the couch is never the answer. And some of that becomes based on how long people have been training for and how self-aware they are. You kind of get to know where that is, but you do have to be cautious on both ends of people that aren't as sure. They lean too much on I just need to sit on the couch today and really just recover from a hard training day. But some people think they're going lighter than they are, but there's some things to be aware of on your own in terms of like how's your breathing, how's heart rate, how's different things, in terms of there are some things to look out for. If you're huffing and puffing, even if you think you're going light, it's probably more intense than you think it is. And that's where self-discipline comes in, of knowing where that line is for, is this an active recovery day or am I getting into another training day? Because one can be extremely beneficial and one can set you up for problems for the next training days or training week.
And that's why you get a coach.
Absolutely.
Or some advisor, because you're going to be in that recovery, whatever it is. And most often than not, it's good for you're at the right effort level. But then you get the athlete that says, but I felt great. but it felt great. So I went out, so I went hard, right? And then on their plan, on that third day is another hard workout because it was originally planned because the day before was supposed to be easy. Mm-hmm. So then they stick to that. So now they've got 3 hard days in a row and there's no adaptation happening. This is where the cycle happens. I think it's good to point this out.
No, it is, because it's really funny. Like when I see BJ reading like through the training peaks, he's like, no, I don't even, like, what, you PR'd something? Like, why would you, wait, no, this isn't even possible because it was a recovery swim. So how did you PR your 100? Like,
That's
how is
awesome.
that even possible?
It is awesome. I'm just like, this is awesome. This is so great.
You're like, nope, tomorrow, easy workout again.
Yeah. Take a true rest day. Maybe it isn't an active recovery day. Maybe it's just like, just hang out and go for a walk.
Walking, yeah.
Walking is a big thing. A lot of, when the athletes get into that zone that we're talking about, the overuse, I found really just a mindful walk of like, feel your core. Like when you like really be into your breath and your core, feel your legs, feel that leg swing from the hip, like feel your foot hit the ground. That to me, for 10 or 15 minutes, probably would take a lot more energy than a run because you're super hyper focused on how your body's reacting in just a walk. So I used to call them mindful walks, but the feedback I would get all the time is, oh yeah, I noticed my core. And so then it compares to every other time they go out for a walk when they're just, listening on their phone or zoning out and they're not thinking about the opportunity they have to have body awareness. So walks are amazing. But yeah, it comes up more often than not where people will feel good and they'll go through that easy training session and they'll push it. But yeah, I think the rest, stress, adapt is a huge component in having an athlete reach their potential. If they're out there constantly training, right? Because we all like to train. We want to be healthy and hit the numbers and be out there active. But if their goal, like you said, is a bigger event, are they staying focused to reach that bigger event? So yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done in the watching of athletes' level of performance, like level of intensity. And I think that was a good key you just said about the breathing. Just check in with how you're breathing.
I was just going to say, can you speak a little bit to breathing, like thoracic breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, and like really how that can affect, I see that more and more as I work with athletes who are working with PTs, like they're like, we're really working on my breathing. And so some athletes might be like, what? My breathing? How does that even have to do with how my body's moving?
Of course I breathe. If I didn't breathe, I'd be dead. Yeah, no, it's become there's always these pendulum shifts too. And it's become, knowing when certain breathe, like we talked, diaphragmatic breathing is huge for recovery for sure. So different things of being able to get into that diaphragmatic breath is what gets so we have our fight or flight nervous system, like we're getting attacked by a bear, everything we want to be able to either fight it or run from it. And we have our rest and digest. So where we should be when we're just hanging out, resting, heart rate's lower. That's when our recovery takes place. Now the problem with our society now is that we're always in this heightened state. So we don't get out of it because even though there's no physical bears attacking us, we have emails that demand our attention. We have stress with kids or family or friends. We have, there's a ton of things that can cause us to stay into that state. And if we're always in that state, if we don't activate that diaphragmatic breathing, then we're not fully hitting some of those recovery things. And when we feel our neck and chest always tensed up, that's what we see a lot of people. And when pain enters the equation, it's even more of the default response is we're only in this upper chest breathing pattern, only breathing from our neck, very shallow breaths, doesn't allow our body to ever feel relaxed and heal the way it needs to. That's the recovery rehabilitative side, but also on the performance side, as we better use and activate our diaphragm, we can better use our core, we can better use our hip muscles, we have better performance, our VO2 is better. There's a lot of things that play a role in that from a performance standpoint too. So being able to train that just as you would anything, we can't just wait until the last mile to start working on that. That's something that has to be trained, probably starting on your back with your feet kicked up. Can you take a full 360-degree breath from your diaphragm consistently? And then can we do that just standing? And then can we do that when we're running? And that's the same progression we would take someone through with strengthening, with building up from no running experience. It's the same way.
So how would they know if they're breathing 360 degrees?
one way to do it, I like to use tactile cueing things, whether that's if you take a belt and put it on your abdomen, kind of right below the rib cage. Don't snug it so tight that you can't breathe, but just enough to give a cue. And I like to use a resistance band, but something that you should feel your stomach pushing out into forward, back, side to side. A lot of people, when they think diaphragmatic breathing, they're just breathing up and down from their belly, but we're not getting that full 360-degree expansion that we're after with something like that. And that's an easy way to check of feeling in lying on your stomach, feeling if you can push into the ground, push out to the side, and push towards the ceiling are some ways to see if you're doing that or not. A lot of people think they are, but they'll still feel their chest rising before their stomach.
Can you speak to the muscular piece of breathing? Because breathing's just a muscular action. I mean, you even have secondary breathing muscles like in the neck, right? And so can you just speak to that as far as like breathing prior to a race, perhaps, where somebody's really nervous or they're about to jump into cold water, and how warming up those breathing muscles, or just kind of talk about the muscularity of that activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're muscles just like anything else, and like you said, neck are our secondary breathing muscles, not our primary ones. And the diaphragm's a muscle, just like other muscles. It's still, if you don't take it through that full range of motion before you need it, it's going to be a lot harder to get to that. Same thing if you were to sit in a chair for 20 hours and then all of a sudden get up and try and run a max out 100-yard sprint. It's going to be harder to do than if you take some time to dynamically move those muscles through the full range of motion, do some leg swings, do some lunges. That 100-yard sprint is going to be a lot easier if you take the time to warm it up. And it's the same thing with breathing. If we never hit those end ranges of motion, then when we need those end ranges of motion, which is when we start huffing and puffing, jumping into cold water, it's not going to be as readily available for us to use.
Yeah, especially like that 360-degree like diaphragmatic breath, because you're jumping into cold water and you're jumping into cold water with a whole bunch of people, and then all of a sudden it's like a washing machine.
And there's no black line, like it's all these factors. It's open water.
And then all of a sudden you're like, I can't breathe, like panic attack, and it's all right in the chest. There's no breath getting even to the belly at that point.
Which further exaggerates anxiety and the other things that you jumped in with the fear of. It's going to only exaggerate that when that happens.
One of the things I learned about when I was in massage school, and I had to retrain how I breathed, was that I was a thoracic breather. So when I breathed in, my belly went in. Mm-hmm. And when I breathed out, my belly went out. And that's like, can you explain that? Like, you'll never get a full breath of air when you breathe like that. How does that affect the nervous system? Yeah,
same way we're talking about. If you're never taking a full breath, then your nervous system isn't ever touching into that, what we call our rest and digest or parasympathetic nervous system, because that breathing pattern's off, so your body never registers that you're taking a full breath. So we stay in that slightly heightened state, which increases things like anxiety, anxious thoughts, increases our resting heart rate. All those things are going to be heightened. And other things that we tend to see from that are, I mean, not to get too far, but like gut problems, we see stress problems, anxiety, all sorts of things from that, because our body doesn't realize that we're breathing the way that we should be at, especially at a resting state. It thinks we're in a heightened state where it needs to be on and attentive.
So gut issues meaning the nutrition that comes in your body not fully absorbing, it's causing some combating inside. That's interesting.
And when you breathe diaphragmatically, essentially, like the diaphragm's like a big dome. It's such a cool muscle, mm-hmm. right? It's so cool. And it's got a big hole right in the center of it for like the inferior vena cava. Is that what goes through there?
Yep.
Like the big, okay. And so when you breathe in, the diaphragm drops, pushing the belly out so the lungs can fill, right? And then as you breathe out, the diaphragm domes back out to get the air out of the lungs, and the belly pulls in. And that would be that diaphragmatic breath, where it's belly, it's front and back ribs, side ribs, chest. You can even feel it like in your upper back, and then those secondary muscles in the neck don't they lift the rib cage and help to depress the rib cage as you breathe?
Mm-hmm. And those shouldn't be overly active at rest, though. The
Right.
secondary ones are more if we're thinking, okay, we're starting to huff and puff a little harder. We're getting to the point where our heart rate's elevated during a training run or a race. That's when those should be kicking in. We shouldn't be feeling so much of those if we're just sitting
With
at
every
rest.
breath.
Yeah.
Right. So that could be a sign of, so somebody who's got like a chronic tight neck could possibly could have something to do with their breathing.
Almost always.
Almost always.
I would go much higher than possibly.
What's your higher than
Most
possible?
definitely breathing.
It's not just glutes and core, you guys.
Newsflash here.
What do you have to say about this? Like, we carry a lot of stories, right? And so the stories we hear as yoga teachers, and what I used to hear as a massage therapist, is my bad back, my bad shoulder, my bad elbow, my bad knee, my bad ankle. And so do you see those? Do you hear those stories? And how do you educate people to try and change that language around them? And why? Why would you want to change the language around that?
See it all the time, and it's unfortunate, especially in chronic cases, like we talked about earlier with acute versus chronic. So acute being we sprain our ankle or we tweak our back, we expect there's a certain one day to, upwards of maybe 2 to 3 weeks in a pretty bad strain or something, we expect to see some actual physiological healing occurring, but we get told these stories either to ourselves or a lot of times it's media, it's friends and family, it's people that mean well of, oh, well, you just have a bad back, or we just have bad backs in our family, or we have arthritis in our family. These things there's genetic components to it. I don't want to
bone on bone, I'm bone on bone.
Yeah, I don't want to discount the genetic components to it, but your bone on bone in most cases is not the only reason why it's causing pain. If you believe that to be the case, then there's a good chance that it's likely hiding that. And see it in these chronic cases, that absolutely has to be addressed for people to make progress. When that's left unaddressed, people don't reach their full potential recovery, because if they believe they have a bad back, then, oh, well, I went to go do some yard work and my back flared up and I was out for 3 days because I have a bad back, so I guess it's always going to be that way. Versus, hey, that's a normal response. You haven't done that in 6 months. You haven't done that in 2 years. You went out and shoveled for 6 hours. Yeah, you're a little sore. Like, you don't have a bad back. You have muscles that haven't been worked in a while. And that can be hard for people to see, though, because these stories run deep, and the longer pain's been going on, the longer they lose hope, and they think that they can't get better. They think that it's going to be something that's always around, but there's not and research shows time and time again, there's pretty bad correlation between what our x-rays say, what our MRIs say, and what is actually presenting as a patient. We look at, you go take 9 out of 10 people off the street and x-ray, there's probably arthritis in all of them, and there's probably a lot of people that aren't walking around in pain. So using that as the sole reason of why you're in pain is a very incomplete story. And like we talked about earlier, is that getting to why they're telling that story is a much harder thing. And is it because they're avoiding something? Is it because their worth is tied up in something? That there's a lot of those can run deeper of why that's occurring, but it's important to address that, or they're always going to be in pain.
Is there a short story? Do you have any stories you can share? Maybe one where you've helped someone kind of turn that table, maybe a successful, maybe an athlete that came in here, or it doesn't even have to be an athlete, someone that came in, you helped kind of flip the table and now they're thriving. Yeah,
the back pain example was one from a patient who's on the tailor end of it now and doing great. Came in with 8-10 years of back pain. Back would always, quote, give out, go out, and which isn't a physiological thing. It's not like the back's actually
That's not a
shifting.
You didn't learn that in your doctorate program?
We didn't learn that.
What does it mean to go out?
Yeah.
My back has gone out.
And that's what they feel, and it becomes that's whenever I feel that, I know I'm going to be hung up for 2 weeks, and they feel something happen, which feels like going out or whatever that may feel like, and then mentally it's like it's already a done decision of the next 2 weeks. I'm going to be on the couch. I'm going to be horizontal. I'm not going to be able to do anything. And that cycle is going on with this guy for eight years, and every, started out as once a year would happen, and then twice a year was happening, and then every quarter was happening, and then once a month, and then it was happening multiple times a month. And it gets to the point where if we don't break that, it's going to be disabled at the rate they're going. But being able to gradually introduce some movements that, and not on day one, but movements that are fearful, movements that when I arch, I know it hurts, and being able to gradually work into some different positions that introduce that in a safe and controlled way builds confidence. And then like, oh, hey, I would expect that to hurt, but now that I'm using certain muscles and now that I'm properly bracing and strong enough to handle that, okay, well, what else you got? And then you keep layering that on, and eventually we're picking up kettlebells off the ground, and we're carrying heavy stuff and doing things that wouldn't have never dreamed of doing, because the confidence is there. And now the story isn't, okay, maybe I don't have a bad back. Maybe this is something that I can see the light of. And in some of these cases, it's not going to ever be fully gone when you've been dealing with 10 years of back pain. But if you go from walking around at an 8 out of 10 back pain every day of your life to occasionally getting a 2 out of 3 back pain, it's a big win in my book.
How long was that you've been working with this person?
Probably since, I think, beginning of February we started, and it's a little more front-loaded on visits. We're initially coming in twice a week because they need more supervision, but lately it's more transition to once a week, and then every other week, and then once a month, and now it's just a maintenance of every 6 weeks or so. He pops in to check in just to revamp some of the exercises and kind of refine things more so than he's independent at this point with what he's doing. He's back to doing all stuff around the house, and really cool to see.
Yeah, when we see people who, we all see it in our life, right? Like people will say, God, I'm so sick of this, or, this negative pattern in my life, da-da-da. And then they'll ask for the resources, and we'll provide the resources, and then it's just back in the same old pattern. And so instead of, shaking my head and going, oh my God, why are they doing it? I'm just like, it doesn't suck enough yet. Like, it just doesn't suck enough yet. And so this person, it's so interesting how it was like, once every 6, and then it was like once a month, and it was like multiple times a month, and then it becomes debilitating. Mm-hmm. We're talking a decade. And we live in this society where like living in pain it's almost the norm. And what do you think about that idea that like living in pain is just what you do, right? It's like
a badge. It's
yeah,
like a badge of honor.
Yeah, a little bit of it.
What do you have? Well, I have this. We hear it at the pool all the time.
Oh, you got a grade 2? I got a grade 3.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Grade 2 sprain? Mine's grade 3. It's
all the way torn. I had a grade 2, and then I made it a grade 3. Yeah, what do you have to say to people who, we got a lot of athletes that are listening to this, so they've got little things going on, and, I'm not an exception to that. And that might be like, well, this is just the way it is.
Yeah, I always say pain's common, but not normal, and it's something that we walk around with, and especially in these overuse cases of we look at tendinitises or even more significant things, rotator cuff tears, hip labral tears are rarely one-time incidents. It's almost always hundreds, thousands of repetitions of incorrect movement that eventually we fray away at our joints and our muscles. This isn't a one-time thing. These are overuse things that can be corrected. Now, if you wait till you're too far gone, and that's where we talk proactive versus reactive. If we wait until it is at a point where it's so bad that you can't sit for more than 5 minutes before your knees and hips hurt, then you dug a deeper hole. It still doesn't mean that you can't reverse it, but it's going to take a little more work. The earlier on we address these things through managing volume, working with the coach, managing your volume, restoring some of the movement and mobility and strength limitations or imbalances you have, a lot of these things can clear up, and see it time and time again that people can rebound very, very well from these things if we give the body has an amazing way to heal if we give it the right environment to do so. And if you're willing to do that, then we see these things, seen crazy back issues and hip issues and knee issues with 100% reversal just because we give it the opportunity to heal in the way that our body is made to do.
And the thing is that you're not healing anyone.
No.
Like you're not doing that. They're doing it with your guidance and your knowledge of the body and your experience, and then tailoring that to their body and their experience, and then their body is healing.
But they have to do the work.
They need to be invested.
Yep.
That's that connection, because a lot of our listeners too are endurance athletes. So it's about getting in the miles. So the strength training sort of takes a back seat, right? And so, and I mean, probably not the most ideal thing to do, but especially everybody should do it, but especially as aging athletes. I'm in my 40s and I'm still logging some good miles, but strength training can be, in my opinion, it can be anything that's moving the body in a way that isn't normal to what your overuse possibilities are, right? So for me, it's swimming, biking, and running. So what would be strength training for me? Power yoga, squats, like non-weight resistant stuff at home that we can do, and I don't leave it to the gym to dictate it. Like I can do stuff at home. So how important is it? How important is strength training for athletes, especially endurance athletes?
And any athlete needs to be strength training. Like you said, people hear that and they immediately think to squatting 300 pounds. It's like that. Strength training can mean a lot of things. A lot of times for most people, that's body weight and glute bridges and core work and squats and lunges, and all those things are strength training and things that are going to help with, whether your goal is performance or longevity, it's something you have to be doing. It's, in my opinion, it's a non-negotiable thing. If your goal is either to do it for the long haul, or if your goal is to perform better, either way, it has to be done, in my opinion.
There's mobility training now too. I guess they're just words. So what would be the difference between mobility versus strength, or are they pretty much the same thing?
Yeah, I tend to
what your interpretation is of it.
Sure, yeah. A lot of the buzzwords can be used interchangeably nowadays with like flexibility and mobility and strength training and stability training. All those things that a good program can tackle both mobility and strength in one. There are some different, slightly different twists to it, but if you're strong through your full range of motion, then that's mobility, that's strength expressed. That both those things are being expressed in that case. Now, flexibility, if you're just doing a passive stretch, like you throw your hamstring up on a chair and hold it there for 60 seconds, we're not building strength in there, and we're probably not getting the most flexibility, mobility benefits either, because that's more of a short-term approach. Our body has no reason to hang on to that range of motion because we haven't stabilized through it. We haven't strengthened through the range of motion after using it.
I was going to ask you that question, like stretching versus activation. And hamstrings, people say, my hamstrings are so tight. They're so tight. But what I've learned is that a lot of times they're weak.
Absolutely. And a lot of times their core's weak because the core plays a big role.
I just tighten my core up.
Yeah.
I know.
Picture yourself.
And I'm breathing 360. Glutes and core are activated, and I'm breathing at 360 degrees.
Glutes and core is enough. Now you have to remember breathing into it, and it's a whole different ballgame.
I'm sorry, interrupted you for a shitty joke.
It was worth it. So we think though, like core is a big component of hamstrings too. There's a lot of people that can get someone to touch their toes within minutes of people that haven't touched their toes in 5 years, when it's not a true hamstring issue. And for a lot of people, it isn't. There's a lot of people that develop this tightness, but they just don't know how to move and control their body, so their hamstrings lock up because your body's trying to create protection somewhere. You think lying on your back, if your core is relaxed and not properly firing when you're lifting your leg, it causes what we call an anterior pelvic tilt. So the hips rock forward, which creates this tension and stretch in our hamstrings. You try and lift your leg, and it doesn't want to go anywhere because your hamstrings are already pre-tensed before the movement even starts. So we say, I must need to stretch my hamstrings more. But all it takes often is properly teaching them how to engage their core. We slightly get this what we call posterior pelvic tilt. The hips rock backwards, and then all of a sudden they have 20, 30 more degrees of range of motion just from activating their core. that sounds like a much easier and more fun approach than stretching your hamstrings every day and foam rolling every day for 2 years, like I hear people do, and they're like, has it gotten better? I don't know, not really. It's still tight, because people are just usually doing the wrong things.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about foam rolling. Like, we have foam rollers and we use them often. Every night we do a little bit of foam rolling, but I would say my IT bands are like the last thing that I roll. I'll work on my calves, I work on my plantar fascia, I work on my quads, and it's not a lot. I'm on it for an hour. It's maybe 5 minutes or so. But with the foam roller, like, I feel like people get it and they're just doing IT bands. And what is that doing for them?
The IT band's a super resilient structure. We're not going to be foam rolling. They've done studies, and it takes upwards of 1,000 pounds of force to create a 1% change in your IT band. So if you want to create more than a 1% change, you would need multiple thousands of pounds of pressure to create a true physiological change. Now, if you're taking that much pressure, your IT band, you're probably going to pass out before you notice anything. So people, and foam rolling, and not to discount foam rolling works, but not for the reasons that people think it does. And it can be a good recovery tool, but I think it affects, I know from research and from other things, that it affects the nervous system more than it does we're not actually breaking up scar tissue. We're not making physiological changes. We're telling the nervous system, we're giving it a stimulus that causes it to relax. But then that follow-up is, what are we doing with that new range of motion? Are we using it? And that could be got to be through movement, through some mobility work, through some light strengthening. If we're not using that after we loosen it up, then we see this big increase in how loose our muscles are, and then it goes back to baseline, and then we see this, and it's this yo-yo thing of back and forth, and people don't see change because we're not properly supplementing that with movement, strengthening, mobility work. That's what hits save on the document, and that's what helps us to save some of that range of motion that we inherited through our flexibility work or foam rolling.
So, like this morning, Beej, you hopped on the foam roller before you went out for your long run. Like, what do you think about that? Like doing a little bit of rolling just to get some things a little bit pliable before you go out. Like, I'll roll my feet sometimes. My feet are tight.
Sensation is less, I should say, when I do that. Sensation in whatever's what I'm working through, like my glutes.
That's our word for pain and discomfort.
We keep
Sometimes
keep it neutral.
The full terminology is swirly sensation.
Swirly sensation.
Yeah.
All right.
Some swirly happening.
Because we don't want to trigger that brain that says that this is bad. It's like, okay, this is what it is. Take the emotion out of it and what's going on.
It can be used as a good tool for warm up too, and you're following that with running or biking or swimming or activity, which you're going to help to save some of that, but also knowing why you're doing it. If you're doing it because you're like, hey, I have to loosen and stretch my muscles, might not be the reason. But if you're just trying to get a little blood flow to the area and get your nervous system to say, hey, I can push off these sensations that I'm feeling, great, then it's a valuable tool. But for a lot of people, the only problem I have with it is when people think they need to spend 30 minutes on a foam roller loosening things up, because there's so much better uses of our time. If it's a quick, we're just hitting some corners and loosening some things up, I think it's a great tool. But people that default to too long on it is where I just think it's a waste of time if you're putting more than 5 minutes on the roller.
All right, let's stay with this kind of topic, because KT tape is like all over the race course. What are your thoughts?
If it helps, it helps. I need some more context on there. I mean, there's some physiological benefits to it, but there's a big placebo component to it too. But I don't care if it works, if it's a placebo or if it's physiological. If it works, it works. I'm not steering someone away from that. It doesn't take that long on the scheme of things. If they're fine paying for a roll of tape and they don't mind throwing it on every time before they run and it helps them, I'm fine with that.
So again, if they believe in it, if you believe in it.
But would you say it was a solution?
No, it's not a solution, because I think it's a better alternative than some of having to take Advil or ibuprofen before every run to get through it. I think KT tape's a better alternative than that, but both ones are just masking the symptoms if you're not, I think if you're using it in addition to trying to move better and get stronger and address some of the things, I'm perfectly fine with
As
it.
a part of like your investment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about like the whole custom orthotic and the smart feet and all of that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm probably going to offend some people, but I'm anti-orthotic in most cases. I think it's creating other imbalances and limitations and more of a crutch than, again, it's not really addressing the problem. If it truly is a foot strength issue, we should strengthen the foot, but a lot of times it traces up to ankle mobility. If our ankles aren't moving well, we're going to have to overpronate more than we should. If our hips aren't stabilizing, same thing.
I found myself going down that road, like smart feet. Oh, my smart feet are worn out. Got to get more smart feet. And then one day I just noticed, like, I can't even walk across the kitchen floor barefoot.
It's a red flag.
That's a red flag. And so and I remember talking to my mom, who's 40 years older than me, and she was like, I walk barefoot all the time. I have great feet. And I was like, So I just started walking across the kitchen floor, and then I would put my shoes on, and then I would like walk from the kitchen to the bedroom, and then back and forth, and now I can walk anywhere. And I realized, because as I was learning in massage school, I was like, this isn't, number one, it's not solving anything. But once I learned that the foot is like, the arch is all muscle. Mm-hmm. It's all muscle. And then we have so many bones in there. And like one of the classes that I was in, we built the foot with clay. That was like one of the things, you'd build the whole body with clay. It was really cool way to learn.
I would have failed that class.
Oh my God, it was amazing. You had like these little tools that you could put the fibers in and everything. Anyway, and when I built the foot, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I realized that my left foot, where my arch had fallen, like, oh yeah, and I'd heard about somebody else who had a fallen arch. Oh, okay, well, I guess I'm just like that. And I'm like, then I realized, like, well, wait a minute, that's just kind of an overstretched muscle, right? Like those are just maybe overstretched. This was my thought. And what if I just strengthened them? And so, I totally agree with you, just not because I have a doctorate in physical therapy, but because I experienced it myself, that so many of my foot issues in the past were coming from the fact that my feet were really weak. And that you can strengthen them. Like, do you think that we should be able to walk around barefoot? What do you think about walking around barefoot?
Absolutely, everyone should be able to walk around barefoot. I know that's, people always throw their shoes on, even if they're in the house or need some kind of support, and that's one of those red flags to me of we should be able to. If we choose not to is different, but you should be able to, and we can build our arches up. I think, especially in a strength training sense, we should do a lot of our strength training barefoot because that's working some different angles and different things of if you're doing lunges or squats or something, it not only strengthens those areas more, but also reveals where some things we might have some mobility limitations that can be hidden with shoes, especially when we talk shoes with an elevated heel. We can hide around some mobility issues if we're always in a shoe.
What do you think about the whole zero drop thing? Like what Ultra's doing with their shoes? Like there's no drop from
toe to heel.
Toe to heel.
I think it's good in terms of, because we see a lot of compensations happen from people that are chronically in an elevated heel in terms of shortening of the Achilles. We lose ankle range of motion. So I think it's beneficial.
Yeah. Cool. My God, we just threw a lot.
I know.
We just threw a lot down.
So
this is good stuff.
But I want to talk about what happens. I know we got to keep moving. So someone who comes in here and they see you, like, what do they walk away with? So a client that comes in to see inside out.
Yeah, so people who are local, we got people who are local here, and they're like,
they've got their area of opportunity. They have their sensation. What do they walk away with when they come see you as a?
Yeah, so everyone's plan is going to be custom to what their goals are, and so I get people in here in a wide range of the spectrum. So we get the reactive types that, hey, this is full blown tendonitis that's been going on for way too long, and see great results with those people, but there's more of it requires a little more in-person stuff. That's a longer term plan. If it happened in 6 months, we're not going to get rid of it in 2 weeks, let alone a month. We're not going to get rid of it in a short amount of time. So there's that end. And then there's the more proactive end of people I see that are coming in. They notice, they're usually pretty aware with their movement. They say, hey, I have this thing that's not quite right. I don't really know what it's coming from. And regardless of where your entry point is, the subjective interview is a big piece of that, of getting training background, getting what you're doing for preventive stuff, any prehab type stuff, if any, what kind of training volume people are putting in. And based on all those factors, then run people through the movement assessment to see where global movement deficiencies are in terms of where people are compensating with things like, can you perform a basic bodyweight squat and lunge and different, like to check rotational things because running and all sports are very rotational in nature. So start global, find where any limitations are, and then test those things specifically of specific muscle testing, specific mobility testing to either confirm or deny what we see with so hey, with your squat, it looks like, I'm guessing there's some ankle mobility limitations. We want to check that, confirm that. And then based on all that information we get a super prioritized plan into usually, based on how often people are coming in, 2 to 5 things that people are working on for their, a list of exercises that are going to give them the most bang for the buck to help whatever they're coming in for.
Because most people are time crunched, right? But they have that honest concern to heal their body, but they're also time crunched. So giving them just 5 exercises is pretty manageable.
Mm-hmm. And for most, it's 3 because people say they could do 5, and I always give less than what because until they can prove
You're
that,
onto that.
until they can prove that to me, I don't quite believe it. And I tell people 7 days a week, hoping that they'll hit 4 to 5.
You've got a really great Instagram channel. You do lots of videos and things like that. So how can people follow you there?
Yeah, it's at IO as in Inside Out Strength Performance on Instagram. Same for Facebook, iostrengthperformance.com for my website as well. Pretty active on social media channels, so that's a good easy place to find me, follow along. Try and put a lot of preventative rehab type strategies on there for all walks of life. So a lot of hopefully useful information that people can find and interact with.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if people are local, they can come and see you here in North County. He's in Carlsbad, and you can just make a beach day out of it and come hang out at this super cool place. Thank you so much. We're going to click off of here and come back on. We're going to do, we've got some questions from our Patreon community, and they're going to get some exclusive content.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Oh, man, that was super informative, dude.
That was great.
A lot of rabbit holes ahead of you.